say that this past week has been somewhat somber, I think might be an understatement. And certainly the results of the election in the United States has had incredible repercussions and reverberations right around the world, of course. We today are here to celebrate or to remember those men and women who have died for the sake of peace. And lastly, we lost one of our Canadian icons, that would be Leonard Cohen. And we will be remembering Leonard during communion in a particular kind of way. Just let that finish. Would that be my wife's? Yeah. They should be in church. Anyway, to go back to the election for a moment, it has been the rare occasion where I have personally felt the kind of uncertainty that this has left us with. It has been the rare occasion where I have felt actually a sense of fear about what the future is going to hold. Actual shock in terms of really reflecting on how in goodness name could so many people vote for an individual who represents what I think he represents: xenophobia, misogyny, racism, division. And yet, here we are. There are times throughout the course of our history, over the last century, where men and women have gone to war in the Great War of 1914 to 1918, during the Second World War, 1939 to 1945, the Korean conflict, and subsequent conflict and peacekeeping missions by our own Canadian men and women, where they have done and put themselves in harm's way because they believe that there's a certain threat to the democratic process, that the moral fiber and ethics and principles upon which we as human beings are meant to live are under siege and threatened. And people who we have elected into particular office and political office have made choices and decisions on our behalf to say we must stand up for the principles in which we believe. And thereby those men and women go into battle, and as we all know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people have lost their lives for that reason, to ensure that peace and the principles of human rights and justice are to prevail. And in the face of Remembrance Day, in the face of the election, we come up with this reading from the Gospel of Luke, which is referred to as the Little Apocalypse. And it is really a difficult passage to hear. But given the state of what has occurred this past year, I think it is an appropriate gospel to reflect on and ask ourselves, what is it that we are hearing? What is God telling us in the midst of all the challenges that we are facing? So the scenario is something like this. The disciples and Jesus are making their way into Jerusalem. We don't know, but possibly many of the disciples may have never been to Jerusalem. And as faithful Jews, many of them would have been very excited to go to the seat and the place where this grand temple, the center of Jewish faith, resided. And this was not just any regular little synagogue. This was magnificent. This was a building that Herod the Great had built. It took him 46 years to build this temple. It was the length of 5 football fields. The foundations for the retaining wall that went around the outside of this great temple were the size of a railway car. And in the center of it, they built this immense, beautiful synagogue made out of marble and fine stone and materials, and the east-facing door of the temple was plated in gold so that when the sun rose from the east, it would reflect on this wonderfully beautiful, gorgeous edifice. So when they would have come into Jerusalem, they would have been in awe. They would have been just beyond words, observing and celebrating this incredible structure. And yet the first thing that Jesus says to them is, as for these things that you're now seeing, don't count on them, because they are not going to exist. The days are going to come when not one of these stones is going to be upon the other. And they're going, what are you talking about? Teacher, tell us, when will this be? And he goes on to say, hey, don't get led astray. There will be people who come who are offering a message in my name and saying, I am he. But don't follow them, don't believe them, because they are false prophets. Be careful who you vote for. And when you hear of these wars and the insurrections and the challenges that are being faced, don't be terrified, because these things must take place. And nation will rise up against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes and in various places famines and plagues, and there will be dreadful portents and the great signs from heavens. It feels as though we are hearing our reality. It feels as though that these things, the great portents and the turmoil and the tumultuous nature of the world, is already here. It's already upon us. And Jesus went on even further to say that it will create great divisions, and families will rise up against families, and there will be challenges amongst people that you care for and love. But then Jesus goes on to say, you will be hated for all of this. You must stand up for what is right. You must believe and be faithful to the God who has called you into these challenges. But don't worry, because your endurance will gain your souls. Your endurance will gain your souls. Be faithful. Be faithful. Stand up for what is right and just. Stand up for the principles that you believe in. See, discipleship hasn't changed much in 2,000 years. Following Jesus and being a person who believes in God, it still means to testifying and trusting in a God in the midst of circumstances that test our confidence and test our hope. So we must keep on going with endurance as a hallmark of what it means to be someone of faith. And we will continue to witness the marvelous miracles that God has in store for us. So we have only got 2 Sundays left before Advent. Can you believe it? Mind-boggling. And over these 2 Sundays, we are hearing these stories, these apocalyptic stories of standing up as faithful Christian people in the face of adversity and challenge. Basically, what we are being asked to do, as Jesus is saying to his disciples, is regardless of what is going on around you, keep your eye on the prize. Keep your eye on keep your eye on, fixed on the purpose of what God has in store for you. Do you see what God has in store? Do you see what Jesus has in store for you? Do not lose sight in the midst of all of the garbage that seems to be going on. And the challenge for us is that we are people that will see what we choose to see. We are people who will become what we choose to experience and how we choose to experience that. Basically, what I mean by that is that if we believe that hope is lost, if we believe that the uncertainty is something we cannot control, if we believe that what is before us is beyond our ability to do anything about it, that outcome will be forthcoming. But what we are hearing is a call to keep our eye on the prize of faithfulness and hope and love and compassion, and to call out the injustices, to call out the inequities, to stand up for the marginalized, even in the face of such uncertainty. Jesus said, "As for these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon the other, and all will be thrown down." So, what things will we see? What things will we see in our churches? What things will we see in our nation? What things will we see in our world? And what we see is what we will say as well. So if you see women as objects, as we have heard in recent weeks, you will speak about them as objects. If you see African and Canadian American people as those who matter less, you won't speak up for them. And if we see God as a judge and as jury, we will only speak about others as deserving of judgment. So our witness and our testimony, our faithfulness, gives voice to what Jesus sees and to what God wants us to be. We must be courageous, we must be faithful, we must not be silent, and we must believe that justice will prevail over wrong. If we do so, we're going to be just fine. Thanks be to God.